Good evening, welcome to Trending Tonight. I'm Vishnu Shom. We've got a couple of important themes that we are looking at tonight. We're going to be looking at India's aspiration to modernize our armed forces and then match that with the reality of there being very little, if anything at all, in terms of substantive amounts in the budget for capital acquisition. That's new modernization, new weapon systems for the armed forces. We're also going to be looking at Employees Provident Fund. That's another part of the budget where there's been a fair amount of confusion. Is that going to be taxed? But let's give you a few more details of this. Firstly, the defense budget this year itself. Let's just look at what the situation at the moment is. The total defense outlay is 3.37 lakh crore rupees. The defense budget is 1.5% of the projected GDP for 2021. Now, the lowest figure, this is the lowest figure since the 1962 war. 1.33 lakh crore rupees has been allocated for defense pensions. So just think about it. A large chunk of that entire amount has gone towards defense pensions. Revenue expenditure is 2,19,998 crores for day-to-day running costs and salaries. Now, if that is the amount of money that goes towards just running the show, as it were, of the armed forces, then the question is, where do we get the money to modernize? Now, there is a number. The capital outlay for new weapons and modernization is 1,18,555 crores. And you would think that that amount of money is a very, very substantive sum. However, in fact, it's not, because that amount of money, 1,18,555 crore rupees that I was talking about, accounts for purchases which have been made in the past and for which installment payments need to be made. A very small or a relatively small part of that is towards new acquisitions, which brings us to the new points. What is the capital outlay for new acquisitions? And it is just 3,183.64 crores over the revised estimates of last time, is the total amount of money across the three services. So the question is this: is that capital outlay even enough for committed expenses? That's what we are looking at. Now let's look at this particular graphic over here. And what we are looking at over here is the budget 2020, and the budget on the right hand side is 2019-2020 and then 2020-2021. In fact, these need to be flipped around. Actually, the numbers on the left are in fact of 2019 and 2020. The numbers on the right are of 2020 and 2021. So bear that in mind for a moment. And the point that we are trying to mention is that the actual increase in the case of the Army, just 2,000 crores. In the case of the Navy, it's more or less the same. And in the case of the Air Force, it's actually lower this time than the revised estimate of last time. Again, a reminder, we've got that slightly mistaken. 2020, 2021 belongs in the right column and vice versa. So, as we discuss this with our group of experts, I'd first like to tell you what the government has actually had to say about this. And I'd interviewed the Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India, Dr. Subramanian, just day before yesterday, and asked him specifically about the capital expenses in the defense budget. Where was the money going to come from? Here's what he said. Capital expenditure is lower. The Air Force at one stage was asking for a capital expenditure increase of 40,000 crores, right? Perhaps we can't as a nation afford that in one financial year. But if it's 3,400 crores across the three services, and there is a crying need for weapons acquisition, Indian and foreign, whatever it may be, then where is the money coming from?
Let me actually answer that. Look, at this stage, in the economy, you started out by saying that, we might have spent sleepless nights. In which case, what is the current priority? The priority has to be, about focusing on growth. In which case, how do you bring in growth? You bring in growth by actually enabling expenditure, capital expenditure that crowds in private investment. And that's where 21% actually increase. Now to mix that up with actually, the defense spending, I think is actually just, taking us aside in a completely different direction.
Well, let's just bring in our panelists at this stage. Vivek Reddy of the BJP joins us. Lieutenant General Satish Dua joins us as well. And Air Commodore Harpreet Basra. All of them absolute experts. Let me come to you first, General Dua. And the question is this. When people look at the capital budget, they say, my God, it's a very large amount of money, 1,18,000 crores plus. However, those are committed expenses to deals which have been signed in the past. That being the case, are we actually being able to afford everything that we planned for?
Vishnu, you are right. The capital budget, the defense budget overall, and also the capital budget allocations to the defense are certainly lower than the defense wants. And that's always been the case. I mean, let's go back. Every year we have a similar debate, and well, it's our armed forces are being modernized, and we need much more than perhaps as a developing country we can afford. I won't get into the debate of how much we should get, but one point I'd just like to make about this 1.62 or whatever figure has been spoken of, that is the 1.62% of the GDP. I think we're just getting carried away by always talking about the percentage of GDP. Let's also look at in terms of government expenditure. And actually, in terms of government expenditure, we are about 15% of plus of the government expenditure is going towards
15%, yeah.
Coming to the point of modernization, modernization does require more. However, if we are always going to get less, I think whatever the earlier speaker said, he was talking about growth. I won't comment on that. But within defense, I think we'll also have to find ways of maximizing within this budget, maximizing within the allocations that we get in terms of, we have a CDS now.
Right.
And the Department of Military Affairs. We should be able to try and resource optimize by integrating. We should get into indigenization in a mission mode. We should get into some innovative ways of creating more wealth, like.
But General Dua, this is a point which is made very often.
Are we able to monetize some land for modernization?
Right. This is a point which is mentioned very often, which is not necessarily always the case, that if we indigenize, our weapon systems are going to be cheaper. In the case of the LCA Tejas, that's not necessarily the case. In the case of warships, destroyers that we are constructing, the new generation of Project 17A destroyers for the Navy, that's not necessarily the case. It's more or less the same because of the large amount of import. So, while indigenization is a goal, obviously, I'm not sure it's necessarily a cost-effective goal in very high-tech areas. Not necessarily, sir. General Dua.
You're right. You're right about the examples that you took. For example, let's take LCA. It's been a project, a long-standing project. That is why we have to do these things in a different manner. For example, the strategic partnership that was launched a couple of years ago, it has yet to bear fruit in terms of cases fructifying, but we've started moving down that road. Once we have better collaborations between the foreign OEMs and our own private sector defense industry, we are bound to see some cost cutting there. It will be far more economical than buying outright, some big platforms being purchased outright from the foreign OEMs.
And it's a matter of scale, right? The more you order, the cheaper it gets.
Having said this,
But General, just to interrupt you for a moment, because I want to go across to my other panelists also.
So, for example,
I'll come back to you, General. I'll come back to you in just a moment from now. I want to go across to Vivek. Vivek, the point mentioned by Nirmala Sitharaman in the beginning or towards the beginning of the Union budget is that national security is a huge priority. And it obviously is. But then there is no mention of the defense budget in the budget itself. It's not the first time. It wasn't said even last time around by Mr. Jaitley. But if you go into the math and you see a situation, for example, with the Air Force, the revised estimate of last time was 44,869 crores. This time it's 43,281 crores. It's actually gone down. And whatever money the armed forces have been getting is towards installments. So, for example, the Rafale deal, a large chunk of this goes towards that. But there are so many other systems, so many other things that we want to buy and which we say we want to buy. So, do we have the money to be doing this, or is national security something we like to talk about without having the ability to pay for it?
Well, I think, Vishnu, there are twofold answers to this. First of all is the overall national security and the manner in which the present NDA government is effectively handling it. I think if you look at the weaponizations program of the NDA, the BJP government, the overall weaponization program has improved, has escalated, and we are a formidable force due to the policies of the present government. If we look at, if the outlay says, if we are analyzing it from the perspective of the outlay, Vishnu, if the outlay says that it is being used for prior installments, well, it is being used for weaponization only.
That's
and
right.
For bolstering the security and security of this nation.
Yeah.
So, either when we pay as past installments or when we are looking at new outlays, one important factor that cannot be lost sight of is that all this goes in for modernization of the army, the air forces and the navy.
Right.
And that
So
is where
that's
this
an
government
important
is
point,
committing
Vivek.
its funds to.
I take that point, and I think,
Yes.
let me take it across to Air Commodore Basra,
Yes.
that the other way of looking at it is by saying, no, 1 minute, the capital expenditure that we do have, it's not as if that's not being put to a certain use, it's being put towards payments, towards the acquisition of weapon systems, whether it's, for example, the S-400 missile system from Russia, more Rafale aircraft from France, or this existing order, or radars from Israel, missiles from Israel, and the like. And those were contracted years ago, but they take 4 or 5 years very often to come online. Therefore, it's not enough just to look at the increase. We need to look at where we put the money in the past and whether that is coming online now or not. If it doesn't, then that's a problem. Would that be a better way of looking at it, Air Commodore?
Yeah, Vishnu, taking from where the previous panelists have spoken, like General Dua mentioned, that there is a lot of change in the procurement procedures which are taking place over a period of time. Coming specifically to the capital budget, as you have seen, the major chunk of the budget goes into the revenue, which is right also in terms of we have a large standing army, the armed forces personnel pay, allowances and maintenance of already existing infrastructure. Now the capital budget is only just about 1/3 of the total budget. And like you mentioned, the Air Force, this year we are getting about 43,000 crores vis-a-vis what we got last year in terms of approximately 44,000 crores in the revised estimates. Now, getting down to specifics of what is coming and what needs to come and how we need to streamline these processes. While if you talk in terms of what budget we have, majority of it in the capital head will be used for the committed liabilities like you already covered. We have certain major tickets which were bought in the preceding years, which is in terms of Rafale, the S-400, and there are other things which are lined up, whether it is the 83 LCA, whether it is additional AWACS, whether it is the operational data link and the AWACS India project. So there is a lot of things that is lined up. Now what we need to do is to somehow try and streamline this process. As you are aware, as on date, this whole process is very long. A lot of governments have been trying to shorten the time. It does take time. From the time the need arises, from the time we get into a kind of a contract, it takes minimum 3 to 5 years. And the delivery schedule normally spreads over 5 years, at least 3 to 5 years. So what we're looking at is, we're looking at almost about 10-year horizon that we need to procure this equipment. Sure. So having said that, what I would like to caution and what I would like to suggest to some of our planners is that while the outlay for the capital budget may appear to be low, but we should not throttle back on the paperwork and on the processes of procuring the equipment, because the gestation period is long. To give certain examples, very specific examples, without getting to, even if you take the LCA project, we signed, I think the first 20 aircraft was signed sometimes way back in 2006. The next 20 was signed in 2010, and we are all aware that we are yet to get the first 20. You can do the maths and see. Another very interesting example is the MR SAM. We were supposed to get about 18 squadrons, and we signed the contract, if my information is right, sometime in 2007.
Yeah.
And it was about 10,000 crores, not even a single delivery has taken place, and the price has gone to approximately 15,000 crores.
So this is an important point, that cost escalation in defense deals, the manner in which, whether, and there's a lot to question our own ability, indigenously. For example, we make some of the finest warships in the world, but because we delay the process of build, the costs actually go up substantially. We've seen this over and over again. But last question to you, General Dua, since I'm running out of time on this particular debate, is this. Is there, to the best of your knowledge, General Dua, a large part of our defense budget which nobody talks about, and that is the strategic side of things? We've got a missile development program, we are a nuclear weapons power, we've got nuclear submarines, these are all established facts. So when we talk about the defense budget and revenue expenditure and capital expenditure, is there a large chunk that the government deliberately will not talk about because it's highly classified, that amount of money? Is that your understanding, sir?
Well, Vishnu, you're right, and I think there are certain things which should really not come in public domain. National security, it would augur well for national security that way. But having said that, allow me to make one last point in line with what the Komoro said. I would also like to leave one broad point. I would like to leave one broad point for the planners. Since the budget is less, it always is less, capital outlays too, then how can we make it better? Our revenue, unlike Air Force, our revenue to capital in the Army, the revenue to capital ratio is worse. It is less than 1/5. Our revenue is 18% to 82% of the, I beg your pardon, the capital is 18% today.
Right.
So, we have to reduce our revenue budget. To that extent, I would like to give two suggestions. One, the chief, the CDS now, has been talking about increasing this retirement age depending on different categories of personnel. So that could ease the revenue budget. Also, we can look at a model. I think we are wasting and not looking at this model, a model of lateral absorption. When soldiers retire very early, they can actually be absorbed in the CAPFs. This is something that has been spoken of often but not been done. It will save cost in training. You have trained manpower which is retiring pretty early in their life. For example, now new 100 new airports are going to be raised. So obviously there will be a requirement of CISF, CRPF, etc.
So I think it's a process
of... That is the time when we can actually have a lateral absorption of soldiers and spruce up.
Right, lateral absorption, that's an important point. We haven't had time as yet to look at some of the options, but I'm just going to very briefly talk about some of these options. Let's try and bring up those graphics. Options to fund defense purchases, possibly a non-lapsable fund for defense acquisitions. That's something that's been looked at. A levy of a special cess. That's something that can be looked at. A tax-free defense bonds, a system of tax-free defense bonds, and a utilization of the proceeds of disinvestment of defense PSU. So those are a couple of options as well. I'd like to thank all of my guests very much for joining us.